It was a calm afternoon at a quiet restaurant that sat at the corner of a busy street. The soft hum of traffic mixed with the gentle sound of dishes clinking and quiet conversations. Inside, the staff moved quickly but carefully, making sure everything stayed perfect for the dinner rush. Among them was a new face, Lena, a young woman who had just started working there a few days ago. She wore the same uniform as everyone else, a crisp white shirt and a black apron tied neatly around her waist. Her hair was pulled back simply and she spoke very little, but when she did, her voice was soft and kind. Lena wasn't the type of person who drew attention. She moved quietly, almost blending into the background. While others laughed, chatted, or complained about the customers, she stayed focused on her work, wiping tables, carrying trays, and making sure guests felt comfortable. Most people didn't pay much attention to her. To them, she was just another worker trying to make ends meet. But if you watched closely, you could see something different in her eyes. A quiet strength, a deep calm that didn't match her ordinary job. The restaurant's manager, Mr. Harris, was a man everyone tried to avoid. He wasn't cruel exactly, but he was proud and loved to make jokes at other people's expense. He believed in hard work, but also liked reminding everyone that he was in charge. He often laughed loudly, especially when he found someone who made a small mistake. On Lena's first week, Mr. Harris made sure to test her. "You're new here," he said, crossing his arms as she stood near the kitchen door holding a tray of drinks. "Let's see if you can handle the evening rush." "Most new ones can't." Lena simply nodded and replied, "I'll do my best." He smirked, clearly unimpressed. "We'll see about that." From then on, he watched her closely. Every time she passed, he made small remarks. Never truly mean, but never kind either. "Careful not to drop that. You missed a spot. You're too quiet. Customers like energy." Lena took it all without complaint. She smiled faintly and kept working. In the center of the restaurant stood a grand piano. It was beautiful once, but now it sat unused, gathering dust. Years ago, the restaurant used to host live music nights, but those ended long before Lena arrived. The piano had become more of a decoration than an instrument, a reminder of something elegant that time had forgotten. Most staff ignored it completely. Some even used it as a surface to place menus or folded napkins when they were in a hurry. But one afternoon, as the lunch crowd faded and the tables were nearly empty, Lena stopped near the piano. She wasn't even sure why she did. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit the glossy wood, or maybe it was the faint smell of old sheet music that lingered in the air. She reached out and gently brushed her fingers across the keys. The dust lifted slightly, leaving faint streaks of white on her fingertips. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the keys. Then, without realizing, she pressed one softly. A single note echoed, a bit out of tune, but warm and full of memories. Something stirred inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A flood of emotions, nostalgia, sadness, and a small spark of joy. She wanted to keep playing, even if just for a moment, to remember what it felt like to let music flow again. But just as her hand moved toward the second key, a sharp voice cut through the quiet. "What do you think you're doing?" Lena froze. It was Mr. Harris, standing near the counter with his arms crossed and an amused grin on his face. Lena turned, a bit startled. "I'm sorry. I was just—" He walked closer, shaking his head with mock seriousness. "You were just about to play, weren't you?" She hesitated. "Just one note, sir." He laughed, loud enough for a few other employees to hear. "One note? This isn't a concert hall, sweetheart. It's a restaurant. If you want to play, you better find a street corner." A few of the other waiters chuckled quietly. Lena lowered her gaze and nodded. "I understand," she said softly. But Mr. Harris wasn't done. He leaned against the piano, wiping a bit of dust off the lid with his sleeve. "You know, this thing hasn't been played in years. The last person who touched it was a real musician, not some part-time server." Lena didn't reply. He continued with a smirk. "Tell you what. If you ever do decide to play this piano, I'll quit right here and now." He laughed at his own joke. "Deal?" The others laughed too. Lena smiled faintly. Not a nervous smile, but a calm, knowing one. "All right," she said quietly. Mr. Harris seemed satisfied and walked away, still chuckling. That night, when the restaurant closed, Lena stayed behind for a few minutes to clean. As she wiped the tables and stacked the chairs, her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. The light from the ceiling reflected off its surface like a quiet invitation. She wanted to touch it again, to play even one full song. But she stopped herself, not here, not yet. The piano meant more to her than anyone there could understand. When she was younger, that sound, the sound of piano keys, had filled her world. Her earliest memories weren't of toys or games, but of music. The first time she sat on a piano bench, she was barely tall enough to reach the pedals. Her mother had placed her small hands on the keys and said, "Go on, sweetheart. Let the piano speak for you." And it did. By the time she was 12, she was performing on small stages. By 15, she was known in her hometown as a rising pianist, the kind people whispered about with pride. Her parents traveled with her to concerts, always smiling in the front row. But one night changed everything. A sudden car accident on a rainy road took both her parents, leaving her alone. The music she loved so deeply suddenly felt painful, heavy, filled with memories she couldn't bear to face. She stopped playing. She sold her piano, packed her things, and moved to a different city to start fresh. Life didn't make it easy. Without family or savings, she took whatever work she could find, waiting tables, cleaning, doing odd jobs. The years passed quietly, each day blurring into the next, but even then the music never completely left her. Sometimes in her small rented room she would tap her fingers on the table, playing invisible melodies only she could hear. Now, standing in that restaurant, staring at the piano that nobody cared about, it felt like fate had quietly placed something from her past in front of her again. Maybe it was a sign, but signs were dangerous when you had nothing to fall back on. She needed this job. She couldn't risk upsetting the manager or being seen as a troublemaker. So she pushed the thought aside and went back to wiping the counter. The next few days passed normally. She served customers, took orders, and quietly observed how people smiled when the right song played through the speakers. One evening, while she carried a tray of wine glasses past the piano, she noticed a little girl staring at it curiously. The girl must have been about 7 years old, dining with her parents. "Why doesn't anyone play that piano?" the child asked her parents loudly. The parents laughed softly. "Maybe no one here knows how." Lena couldn't help but smile at that. The little girl turned to her and asked, "Do you know how to play?" Lena paused for a moment, unsure how to answer. Then she said gently, "A little." The girl's face lit up. "Then you should play. It's so boring when no one does." Her parents laughed again, embarrassed, but Lena just smiled. "Maybe someday," she said quietly. As she walked away, she heard Mr. Harris's voice calling orders from the back. "Let's move it, people. Customers don't wait forever." The peaceful moment ended, and she went back to work. But that night, when she closed her eyes, she couldn't stop hearing the sound of that single dusty note she had played earlier. It echoed in her mind like a memory trying to find its way home. The next morning came softly with gray clouds hanging over the city. The streets were still wet from the night's rain, and the air smelled fresh. Lena walked slowly toward the restaurant, her small bag hanging from her shoulder and her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She always came early, long before anyone else. It wasn't because she had to, it was just her way of preparing for the day, finding a bit of peace before the noise began. The restaurant, empty and quiet, felt different in the morning. The chairs were still stacked, the lights dim, and the world outside hadn't quite woken up. She walked past the piano again. The morning light touched its surface, and for a brief moment it looked alive again, shining softly, almost inviting her to come closer. She stopped, staring at it. Her reflection faintly appeared on the polished lid. She could see her own eyes looking back, tired but gentle, carrying years of silence that no one there knew about. She placed her hand on the piano lid and whispered to herself, "You're still here." When the rest of the staff began to arrive, she stepped away quickly, pretending to rearrange menus and wipe tables. She didn't want anyone to see that side of her. Maya, another waitress who had worked there longer, noticed how quiet Lena always was. She was friendly, kind-hearted, and often tried to include Lena in conversations. "You always come early," Maya said one morning while setting the tables. "You like it that much here?" Lena smiled faintly. "It's peaceful before the rush starts," Maya nodded. "True, but you know what's strange? You never complain about anything. Not about the hours, not about Mr. Harris, not even about the tips. Everyone else does," Lena laughed softly. "Complaining doesn't change much, does it?" That answer made Maya curious. You're not from here, are you? Lena shook her head. No, I moved here a few years ago. Family? She hesitated, her smile fading a little. No, not anymore. Maya didn't ask further. She could sense that whatever the story was, it wasn't something to dig into casually. Later that afternoon, during their short break, the two of them sat outside near the back entrance. The air smelled faintly of coffee and freshly baked bread from the nearby cafe. Maya scrolled through her phone while Lena stared at the passing cars. After a few minutes, Maya spoke again. You know, I've always wanted to learn an instrument. I love the sound of the piano. It's so beautiful. Lena's fingers twitched slightly. She looked down at them. Hands that had once danced across the keys for hours every day. It is, she said quietly. You ever try learning? Maya asked, sipping her drink. Lena hesitated before answering. I used to play. Maya looked surprised. Really, how long? For most of my life, Lena replied. Since I was a child, Maya's eyes widened. No way, you serious? That's amazing. Why didn't you tell anyone? Lena smiled sadly. It's part of an old life. Maya tilted her head. You mean, you stopped? Yes, why? There was a long pause. Lena looked at the ground for a moment, her mind drifting to places she didn't visit often. It just became too hard, she finally said. Sometimes the thing you love the most is also the thing that hurts you the most. Maya stayed quiet. There was something in Lena's tone that made her realize this wasn't just about music. It was about loss. That night, after work, Lena went back to her small apartment. It was simple, a small room with a single window overlooking the street. There wasn't much furniture, a bed, a small table, a few books, and a kettle. But it was enough. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. Her fingers traced invisible piano keys on the table, playing a melody only she could hear. Her mind wandered back to years ago, before her world had fallen apart. She remembered being on a bright stage, under warm lights, the audience completely silent as her hands moved gracefully over the keys. Each note she played seemed to float in the air like magic. When she finished, people stood and clapped for her. She remembered her parents' faces in the front row, beaming with pride. Her mother had always said, "Your music makes people feel something they can't put into words." That was her life then. Practice in the mornings, lessons in the afternoons, concerts on weekends. Her days were filled with sound. Music was her language until that night, the night she lost everything. It was raining hard, just like tonight. Her parents had gone out to pick her up after a rehearsal. She remembered waiting at the entrance of the hall, holding her music sheets when the call came. An accident. The world changed in a single moment. The lights that had once felt warm now felt harsh and cold. The piano, her safe place, turned into a reminder of everything she had lost. She stopped playing after the funeral. For months, she couldn't even look at a piano. The sound of the keys made her heart ache. The music that once gave her joy now only brought tears. She tried to start again once, sitting down at the piano bench and placing her fingers on the keys. But as soon as she played the first note, the memories came flooding back. The laughter of her parents, their voices cheering from the crowd. She couldn't handle it. She closed the lid and walked away, and she never went back. When money started running out, she had to find a job. Any job. She cleaned, served, and did everything she could to survive. Over time, she became used to the silence. It was easier to live without music than to feel its pain. But deep down, it never left her. Sometimes, when she passed by a music store, she'd stop for a few seconds outside just to listen. When she heard someone playing on the street, she'd slow her steps. It was like hearing an old friend calling from far away. Now, after all these years, life had quietly placed a piano back in her path. The same instrument she had abandoned was sitting in that restaurant, old, dusty, but still alive. She didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Or maybe it was life's way of reminding her that she couldn't run forever. A few days later, she came in early again. The restaurant was still empty, and she found herself once more standing near the piano. She looked around carefully to make sure no one was there. Then slowly she lifted the lid. The keys looked worn but familiar. Her fingers hovered over them for a moment. She pressed one. A low note filled the air. Soft, but deep. It wasn't perfect, slightly off key, but to her it was beautiful. She played another. And another. Soon her hands began moving on their own, playing a gentle melody from her childhood. The sound filled the empty space, echoing softly through the restaurant. It was like breathing again after holding her breath for years. But as soon as the door creaked behind her, she stopped and closed the lid quickly. It was only the cleaner bringing in supplies. The woman didn't notice her at all, and Lena exhaled quietly, relieved. From that day on, whenever she had a few minutes alone before the restaurant opened, she would play softly, just enough to hear the notes but not enough for anyone outside to notice. Those few minutes became her secret. A small piece of her old life she could visit without fear. One afternoon, Maya caught her standing near the piano again. "You really like that thing, don't you?" she said with a grin. Lena smiled. "It helps me think." "You should play for everyone sometime," Maya said cheerfully. "Maybe during a slow night." Before Lena could respond, Mr. Harris's voice echoed from across the room. "What's this? Piano lessons now?" Maya quickly turned away, pretending to adjust a chair. Lena said nothing. Mr. Harris walked up, tapping the piano lid with his finger. "This thing's been sitting here for years, and now suddenly everyone wants to touch it." "Don't waste your time. You've got tables to clean." Lena nodded quietly. "Yes, sir." As he walked away, he muttered, "If anyone ever tries playing that old thing, I swear I'll walk out myself." The words stung a little, not because they were harsh, but because they reminded her that she was still hiding, still pretending to be someone she wasn't. But for now, she stayed quiet. She wasn't ready yet. What no one in that restaurant knew was that the woman they saw carrying trays and wiping tables wasn't just another worker. She had once performed in concert halls, played for hundreds, and made people cry through her music. They saw a server, but she carried within her the soul of a pianist, one who had lived, lost, and was slowly finding her way back. And soon, very soon, fate would give her no choice but to reveal who she really was. It was a Friday evening, and the restaurant buzzed with excitement. Outside, the sky glowed orange as the sun began to set. Inside, the lights were warm and golden, reflecting softly off the glasses and polished wood. Every table was booked. The air smelled of freshly baked bread and roasted herbs. This wasn't just another busy night, it was a special one. The restaurant was hosting a private dinner for a group of important guests. Businessmen, artists, and even a few well-known faces were expected. Everything had to be perfect. The staff rushed around, making sure every detail was right. Napkins folded neatly, candles lit, music playing softly in the background. Mr. Harris was more serious than usual, walking around with a clipboard pointing out even the smallest mistakes. "Check the glasses. Straighten the chairs. I want no complaints tonight," he barked. Lena moved quietly among the team, her calm energy balancing out the tension in the room. She carried plates, helped set tables, and smiled politely at guests as they began to arrive. She had worked enough of these nights to know how they went. Long hours, strict service, and no mistakes allowed. But tonight felt a little different. She couldn't say why, but there was a strange feeling in her chest, like something important was waiting just beyond the next hour. The piano, as always, stood quietly in its corner. Forgotten, a small layer of dust had gathered on its surface again. The soft background music came from speakers instead, nice enough but lifeless compared to the sound of real keys. As the evening went on, the guests laughed and talked over wine and dinner. The restaurant glowed with life. Everything seemed to be going well until it didn't. Around 7 o'clock, the sound system suddenly glitched. The music stopped mid-song. The speakers gave a small pop, then went silent. Mr. Harris's head shot up immediately. "What happened to the music?" One of the waiters hurried to check. "I think the system froze." "It won't play. Try resetting it," Mr. Harris ordered. I did. "It's not working." The room suddenly felt too quiet. The guests started looking around, whispering to each other. Music had been the thing keeping the atmosphere smooth and relaxed, and now the silence felt heavy. Mr. Harris muttered under his breath, already sweating from the stress. "Great. Just what we need on a night like this." One of the guests, a middle-aged man sitting near the center, raised his hand and called out jokingly, "Hey, no music tonight? I thought this place was famous for its atmosphere." A few others laughed lightly. Mr. Harris forced a smile. "Just a technical issue, sir. It'll be fixed in a moment." But it wasn't. The sound system was dead. Another guest, a woman in a bright red dress, looked toward the corner where the piano sat. "There's a piano right there," she said. "Why not use that?" Her voice was clear enough that everyone around heard. Heads turned toward the piano, then toward Mr. Harris. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. That old thing hasn't been played in years. It's more decoration than anything." The woman smiled. "Still, it looks lovely. Surely someone here knows how to play a tune or two?" A few people chuckled. "Come on, it would make the night more fun," another guest said. Mr. Harris laughed nervously, trying to wave it off. "Unless one of you wants to give it a try, I doubt anyone here can." Lena stood a few feet away, holding a tray of empty glasses. She froze when she heard those words. Her eyes drifted toward the piano, then to the guests, then to her manager. For a few seconds she stood completely still, her heart thudding in her chest. Something inside her whispered, "This is your moment." Before she could stop herself, she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear enough to be heard. "I can play." The words came out almost on their own. The air seemed to pause. The nearest waiter turned to look at her. A few guests stopped talking. Mr. Harris blinked, confused. "What did you say?" Lena swallowed. "I said, I can play the piano." There was a beat of silence, then a ripple of surprise across the tables. The woman in the red dress smiled widely. "Really? That's wonderful. You should play for us." Mr. Harris's face twisted slightly, half in disbelief, half in irritation. You're serious?" Lena nodded quietly. He laughed, trying to turn it into a joke. "You must be joking. You're a server, not a musician. The guest came for dinner, not a performance." The woman frowned. "Oh, let her play, why not? It'll be charming." A few guests clapped lightly, encouraging her. "Yes, let's hear her." Mr. Harris's forced smile faltered. He clearly didn't like the idea, but couldn't argue without looking rude in front of everyone. He sighed loudly. "Fine, if the guests want it, then go ahead, just don't make a fool of yourself." Lena nodded, her heart racing. She wiped her hands on her apron, feeling suddenly aware of every eye in the room on her. As she walked toward the piano, time seemed to slow. Every sound, the clinking of glasses, the soft laughter, faded into the background. The closer she got, the quieter the world became. She stood before the piano and lifted the lid carefully. The faint scent of old wood and dust rose in the air. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment. She could feel the tremor in her fingers, not from fear, but from something deeper, nerves mixed with longing. Behind her, someone whispered, "I hope she knows what she's doing." Another voice chuckled softly. This should be interesting. Even Mr. Harris crossed his arms, shaking his head slightly as if waiting for a disaster. But Lena didn't look at anyone. She closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. In her mind, she could almost hear her mother's voice again. "Let the piano speak for you." And then she began to play. At first, the sound was soft, hesitant, like testing the air. A few gentle notes, fragile but warm, floated through the silence. The guests stopped talking. Forks and knives were set down. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade away. Then her hands found their rhythm. The melody grew, smooth and full of life. Every note carried emotion, sadness, beauty, hope, all woven together in a way that words could never express. The dusty old piano, once forgotten, came alive under her touch. The room transformed. The air itself seemed to listen. The guests who had laughed moments ago now sat quietly, their expressions softening. Some closed their eyes. Some leaned forward, completely lost in the sound. Even Mr. Harris stood still, his mouth slightly open, disbelief written all over his face. Lena didn't notice any of it. Her world had narrowed down to the keys beneath her fingers and the rhythm of her heart. She wasn't just playing. She was remembering her childhood, her parents, every moment that had led her here. The music wasn't just for them. It was for her too. When the final note faded into silence, there was a long pause. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, as if waking from a dream, the room erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some whistled. Others shouted, "Bravo!" Lena opened her eyes, slightly dazed. She hadn't expected that reaction. She smiled shyly and gave a small nod of thanks. The woman in red stood up and said loudly, "That was incredible. You play beautifully." Others joined in with praise. "That was amazing. Where did you learn to play like that?"
"You're talented."
Lena didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she managed softly. Mr. Harris walked toward her slowly, his face unreadable. The guests' applause still filled the room, but his voice cut through it. "You never told anyone you could play like that." Lena looked at him calmly. No one asked. He blinked, caught off guard by her simple answer. For once, he didn't have a comeback. The restaurant's owner, who had been among the guests that evening, came forward smiling warmly. "That was one of the most moving performances I've heard in a long time," he said. "You must play for us again." Lena hesitated. I don't usually perform anymore." The owner shook his head kindly. "You should. Music like that shouldn't stay silent." The guests clapped again as she stepped back, letting the moment fade naturally. As the night went on, the energy in the restaurant felt different, softer, kinder. People smiled more, conversations flowed, and though the sound system stayed broken, no one missed it. In the corner, the piano stood proudly, shining under the light, as if it too had been waiting for this night to come. Later, when the last guests had left and the staff began cleaning up, Mr. Harris approached Lena again. He didn't say much, just looked at her for a long moment before muttering, "You surprised me tonight." She smiled faintly. Maybe the piano just needed someone to listen again. He nodded slowly, speechless for once. As she left the restaurant that night, the cool air touched her face. The streets were quiet, the city lights glowing softly. She felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time in a long while, she had let music speak again, and deep inside she knew this was only the beginning. The following week, the restaurant seemed different, though nothing had changed. The tables were still arranged the same warm lights glowed over polished wood, and the piano still rested quietly in the corner. But the atmosphere felt lighter, more alive, as though the memory of Lena's performance the previous Friday had left a subtle energy in the air. Staff whispered in corners, glancing toward the piano whenever they passed. Even the guests who came by for lunch commented on how cozy the place felt. And for Lena, each moment at work now carried a strange mix of anticipation and quiet nervousness. She moved through her tasks as usual, serving drinks, clearing plates, refilling water, but always kept an eye on the piano. It called to her in a way she could no longer ignore. Maya noticed it immediately. "You've been staring at that thing all week," she said gently while they wiped down a table together. "You planning another surprise?" Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe," Maya grinned. "You should. You left everyone speechless last Friday. Even Mr. Harris couldn't find words." Lena shook her head. "It wasn't about them. It was just something I needed to do." Maya tilted her head, sensing there was more behind the quiet answer, but she didn't push. Lena had always been private, and her silence was something Maya had learned to respect. That evening, the restaurant prepared for another special event, a private dinner for a small group of business clients. The same old issues came up, the waitstaff rushing to set tables, the kitchen coordinating orders, and Mr. Harris pacing like a caged animal, making sure everything looked perfect. But tonight there was a different energy in the air. Several of the guests were seated near the piano. A few of them had seen Lena's performance the previous week, and they were curious to know if she might play again. Mr. Harris, as usual, remained skeptical. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching Lena closely. "Don't even think about touching that thing," he muttered under his breath. "You're a server." "That's it," Lena smiled faintly. "Of course," she replied quietly, though inside her heart raced. The dinner went on smoothly, the guests chatting and laughing, plates clinking softly, glasses filled with wine. But as the main course finished, one of the guests, a man with sharp eyes and a gentle smile, looked toward the piano and asked, "Do you have anyone who plays?" "We'd love a little live music tonight." Lena froze. She glanced at Mr. Harris, his face twisted in disbelief and a hint of panic. "No, no one plays," he said quickly, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just a decorative piece." The guest smiled politely but didn't press further. "That's a shame. It's a beautiful piano. Maybe next time." The conversation ended, but the thought lingered in Lena's mind. She could feel the old rhythm building inside her, a quiet urgency she could no longer ignore. The piano wasn't just furniture. It was a bridge to a part of her life she had abandoned for too long. Later, as the guests were finishing dessert, another voice called from the back of the restaurant. A woman in her 40s seated near the piano leaned forward and said loudly, "I think it would be wonderful if someone played. Don't you agree?" A few guests nodded and whispers of agreement spread. "Yes, that would be lovely. Just a short piece, perhaps?" Lena's hands twitched involuntarily. Her mind raced. She knew what she wanted to do, but every instinct screamed caution. Mr. Harris's warnings echoed in her mind. If she played again, she risked his anger. Yet at the same time, she felt a pull she couldn't deny, a call that had grown louder since that first evening. The moment stretched. Lena could feel all eyes on the piano, and even though no one looked directly at her, the silent expectation was heavy. Finally, she took a deep breath and walked forward. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter with every step she took. She lifted the lid, and for a moment she paused, fingers hovering above the keys. Mr. Harris stepped forward. "I warned you," he said softly, but there was no anger in his voice this time, more disbelief than anything else. Lena ignored him. She pressed a single key. The note echoed softly through the room, rich and full, carrying a quiet elegance that made people stop mid-conversation. She pressed another and then another, until a gentle melody began to flow. The piano responded to her touch like an old friend, bringing life to the corner of the room that had once been silent. The guests stopped eating and talking, mesmerized by the unexpected beauty. Mr. Harris leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his mouth slightly open. He had seen her before, but he had never imagined this. Never imagined that the quiet, unassuming server could summon such power from an old, forgotten piano. The melody grew bolder, richer. Lena's fingers moved effortlessly, weaving emotions into each note. There was sadness, yes, but also hope, joy, and an undeniable strength. She had performed for audiences before, but none had the intimacy of this small room filled with strangers who were hearing her for the first time. A few guests whispered to each other, clearly moved. "Who is she?" one asked. "Where did she learn to play like that?" Lena didn't look up. She didn't need to. The music itself was saying everything she wanted to share. Minutes passed, but in those moments time seemed suspended. The hum of the city outside, the clatter of dishes, even the occasional cough, all of it vanished. There was only her and the piano, a silent conversation between her hands and the instrument. As she played the last note, the room fell into a stunned silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then applause broke out, slow at first, then louder, stronger, filling the space with warmth and awe. The guests rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others simply stared, lost in the memory of what they had just heard. Even Mr. Harris looked frozen. His pride had been challenged, his assumptions shattered. The man who had once laughed at the idea of her playing now stood speechless, unsure of how to respond. The restaurant owner, who had been observing quietly from a distance, stepped forward. "That was extraordinary," he said warmly, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "You must play again." Lena hesitated. She had no desire for attention, but she also knew the music wanted to be heard. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will." Mr. Harris finally found his voice, though it was shaky. I didn't know," he admitted, almost whispering. "I didn't know you could do that." Lena smiled gently. "It's all right. You didn't need to know." That night, as the guests left, the restaurant buzzed with praise. People spoke of her talent in hushed, awed voices. Some even asked if she performed elsewhere, hoping for another chance to hear her play. Back in the quiet of the empty dining room, Lena wiped down the tables, her hands still trembling slightly from the performance. The piano sat silently, its keys warm from her touch as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Mr. Harris approached her once more. This time there was no laughter, no mockery, only a quiet respect. "You really are something else," he said. Lena nodded. "Thank you." For the first time in years, she felt a sense of belonging, not because of the job or the restaurant, or even the applause, but because she had finally acknowledged the part of herself she had kept hidden. Music, she realized, was not something to hide. It was part of her soul, and tonight she had let it shine again. As she left the restaurant that night, the city lights reflected in her eyes. She felt lighter, freer, and more alive than she had in years. And in the quiet of the streets, she knew something had changed. The laughter, the disbelief, the astonishment. All of it had led to this moment. The moment when the world began to see her not just as a server, but as someone extraordinary. And deep inside, Lena understood one simple truth. The piano had always been waiting for her. She had been waiting for it too. The next evening, the restaurant was busier than ever. Word of Lena's unexpected performance had spread quietly among regular guests and some new faces. People arrived early, eager to see the server who plays piano like a concert pianist, as a few whispers had described her. Some were skeptical, some curious, but all carried a sense of anticipation in the air. Lena arrived as usual, calm and composed, carrying her small bag and wearing her uniform neatly. She had barely slept the night before, not from nerves but from the excitement building quietly in her chest. The piano called to her again more insistently this time, and she could feel the energy of her old life waiting to pour out. The restaurant manager, Mr. Harris, was pacing near the entrance, arms crossed, looking tense. He had heard about the murmurs outside, the curiosity of the guests, and the subtle buzz that had grown since the previous week. He tried to mask his worry with sarcasm. "If she thinks she can pull that off again," he muttered to a waiter passing by. "I swear I don't know, but it can't end well." The staff, meanwhile, watched Lena closely. They had already witnessed the quiet miracle of her first performance, but this evening carried a different weight. Tonight, the audience was larger, the stakes higher, and the energy in the room palpable. As the main course was being served, a soft conversation drifted toward the piano. One of the guests, a middle-aged woman with a sharp but kind smile, leaned forward and asked, "Is she going to play tonight?" "I heard she is remarkable." Several other guests nodded. Some whispered to each other. The anticipation in the air was nearly tangible. Lena's hands twitched as she passed by the piano to refill water glasses. She could feel the keys beneath her fingertips even though she hadn't touched them yet. Her breath caught slightly in her chest. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The moment that would decide whether she could reclaim a part of herself she had hidden for so long. The woman in red from the previous performance, who was seated near the piano again, clapped her hands lightly. "Go on," she said with an encouraging smile. "Please play for us." Mr. Harris, overhearing this, froze mid-step. I don't think this is a good idea," he said cautiously. "The guests came here to dine, not for a show." The woman shook her head. "It's not just a show. It's a gift. Let her share it." A few other guests joined in. "Yes, let her. Please don't deny us this." Mr. Harris's face turned red, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. He muttered, "Fine. Just don't ruin it," before stepping aside. Lena nodded quietly, her heart beating fast. She walked to the piano, lifting the lid gently. The keys gleamed faintly under the soft lights, inviting her touch. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep, steadying breath. Then she began. The first note was delicate, almost tentative, but perfectly controlled. A hush fell over the restaurant. Guests stopped talking mid-sentence. Forks paused mid-air, and even the kitchen staff paused in their movements to listen. The second note followed, richer, stronger. Her hands moved gracefully over the keys, finding a rhythm that seemed to rise from somewhere deep within her soul. Each note carried a story, longing, loss, hope, and beauty intertwined in a seamless melody. The piano, once forgotten, responded to her touch with full resonance. Its sound filled the room, soft yet commanding, wrapping around the tables and weaving through the conversations that had been silenced. Guests leaned forward, eyes wide. Some whispered to each other, unable to comprehend the depth and skill they were witnessing. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Mr. Harris, standing near the counter, felt his disbelief growing into something he couldn't name. He had seen Lena serve drinks, wipe tables, and carry trays, but this was a revelation. He had laughed at the idea of her playing, mocked the thought even, and yet here she was, transforming the entire space with her music. Minutes passed, but Lena remained fully absorbed in her performance. Every note seemed to flow naturally, effortlessly, yet each was precise and intentional. The melody rose and fell like a gentle wave, powerful yet tender. She played with passion, but not for attention. She played because it was part of her being. A few guests had tears in their eyes. The woman in red pressed her hand over her heart, whispering, "It's like she's speaking to us with her soul." The room became a living thing. The clinking of glasses and muted laughter were replaced by the soft echoes of the piano, And in those echoes, everyone could feel something they had long forgotten: the raw power of beauty, the quiet strength of expression, the magic that only music could convey. One man, who had seemed impatient when he first arrived, sat rigid in his chair, completely silent, unable to move as the melody wrapped around him. A young couple exchanged glances, smiling through tears. The staff stood frozen, unable to tear their eyes away, as if witnessing something extraordinary. Lena's hands moved faster now, her fingers dancing over the keys with incredible skill. Her heart poured into the music, carrying years of hidden emotions. The piano seemed to awaken beneath her touch, responding to her every intention, every nuance. Mr. Harris could hardly breathe. The man who had once mocked her, laughed at her quiet nature, and doubted her ability now stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. He had seen talent before, yes, but never like this. This was not just skill. This was life, experience, pain, joy, and mastery all rolled into one. The melody reached its peak, powerful yet intimate. The guests who had come for dinner now felt as though they had been transported somewhere else, somewhere beyond the restaurant walls, somewhere that felt sacred and alive. And then, just as suddenly as it rose, the music softened. Lena slowed, letting the final notes linger in the air, vibrating gently like a heartbeat. The room was completely silent for a moment, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Then, the silence broke. Applause erupted, overwhelming and heartfelt. Guests stood cheering, clapping, and shouting words of amazement. Some cried openly, touched in a way they had never expected. Others laughed and shook their heads in disbelief. Mr. Harris, for the first time in his life, was speechless. His pride had been replaced by awe, his laughter replaced by the realization that he had underestimated someone he thought he knew. The restaurant owner approached Lena, eyes shining. "I have never heard anything like that," he said softly. "You must play for everyone, always. The world needs to hear this." Lena smiled, a small, humble smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to play." A few guests approached her, some shyly, some with tears in their eyes. "Thank you for sharing this," one whispered. "It was beautiful. It felt like magic." Another guest said, "You have a gift. Truly extraordinary. Where have you been hiding all this time?" Lena looked down, her fingers still brushing the keys lightly. "Life has a way of hiding things sometimes," she said softly. "But they never really go away." Mr. Harris cleared his throat, still stunned. I should apologize," he muttered. "I had no idea. I didn't realize you—" His words stumbled, caught between awe and humility. Lena nodded gently. "It's all right. Sometimes people only see what's in front of them, not what's within." That night, after the guests left and the restaurant quieted down, Lena remained by the piano a little longer. Her hands hovered over the keys, touching them gently, remembering every note she had played. For the first time in years, she felt whole, alive, and free. The piano was no longer just an object. It had become a companion, a witness, and a part of her again. It had allowed her to speak without words, to reveal a piece of herself she had kept hidden for too long. Mr. Harris, finally finding his composure, approached her one last time before leaving. I misjudged you," he admitted quietly. "You are remarkable." Lena smiled faintly. "Thank you." As she left the restaurant that night, stepping into the cool evening air, the city lights reflected in her eyes. She felt lighter, freer, and more alive than she had in years. The weight of silence, of lost years, seemed to lift from her shoulders. She knew deep inside that nothing would ever be the same again. The world had seen her talent. The piano had spoken, and the life she had buried for so long was beginning to return. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt hope, not just for herself, but for the music that had always been her companion, waiting patiently for the day she would find her way back to it. The next morning, the city felt different. The streets seemed brighter, somehow lighter, though the sun had not yet risen fully. Lena walked to the restaurant with a quiet calmness, the rhythm of her steps steady, almost as if she carried the music inside her. The events of the previous nights had left a mark, not just on her, but on the people who had witnessed her gift. When she entered the restaurant, she noticed subtle changes. A few guests from the weekend had left notes praising the music, thanking her for sharing something so special. They were pinned neatly on the staff notice board, a small collection of words that carried more weight than any paycheck could. Maya greeted her with a wide smile. "You know," she said softly, "people are still talking about what happened last night. You didn't just play, you reminded them of something they had forgotten." Lena nodded, brushing her hands against her apron. "It feels strange," she said. "I've been away from music for so long, and now it feels like it's part of me again." Maya laughed softly. "Part of you?" "Lena, it's been part of you all along. It always was." As they moved through the morning routine, Mr. Harris appeared, holding a small stack of papers. He looked at Lena with an unfamiliar expression, humble, respectful, even slightly nervous. I need to talk to you," he said quietly, stepping aside. Lena followed him to the corner of the restaurant. She wasn't sure what to expect. Perhaps another warning, perhaps a complaint. But instead he looked at her earnestly, the arrogance he had carried for years replaced by genuine respect. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About you, about the piano, about everything. I laughed. I underestimated you, and I should apologize." Lena blinked, slightly surprised. She had expected excuses, deflections, or maybe even anger, but this was different. "It's all right," she said gently. "Everyone misjudges sometimes. What matters is that we learn." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing every word. "I don't want to just let this talent go unnoticed anymore. You have something rare. I can see that now." The words felt strange coming from him, but they were sincere. For the first time, Lena didn't feel the need to hide. She could be herself openly, without fear of ridicule or misunderstanding. Word began to spread more quickly after that night. Regular guests mentioned her performances to friends. Social media posts quietly praised the hidden pianist who worked as a server, but played with extraordinary skill. And soon, invitations started arriving, requests for private events, small concerts, and local gatherings. Lena found herself at a crossroads. She could continue quietly, serving at the restaurant and playing in secret, or she could step into a world she had long abandoned, a world of music and recognition that had once been her life. It was the first time she allowed herself to consider the possibility openly. And in that consideration there was no fear, only hope. One afternoon, as she polished the piano while the restaurant was empty, Mr. Harris approached. "There's someone I think you should meet," he said, holding a small envelope. Inside was a note from a local music director, someone who had heard whispers about Lena's talent and wanted to meet her for an audition. Lena's hands trembled slightly. She had avoided the world of music for so long, convinced it was lost to her forever, and now, here it was, coming back gently, insistently, offering her a chance she had once believed she no longer deserved. "Do you want to do it?" Mr. Harris asked, his eyes careful. He wasn't pushing, only offering support. Lena looked at him, her mind racing. She thought of the piano, of the melodies she had kept secret, of the nights she had dreamed of playing again. "Yes," she said finally. "I think it's time." The days that followed were a mix of preparation and nerves. She spent hours with the piano, rehearsing pieces she had once played effortlessly, now reconnecting with her old skill. Each day brought confidence, and with confidence came a quiet joy she hadn't felt in years. When the day of the audition arrived, Lena entered the music hall quietly. The space was large, with high ceilings and polished floors. The director waited near the piano, looking intrigued and curious. Lena took a deep breath and approached the instrument. She placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the music flow. The sound filled the hall, clear and powerful. Every note spoke of her journey, her loss, her silence, her rediscovery. The director listened silently, completely captivated. By the time she finished, there was a long pause before the applause began. You're extraordinary," the director said finally. "I've heard many talented pianists, but what you have is rare. This is more than skill, it's heart, soul, life itself." Lena smiled softly, letting the praise sink in. For so long she had hidden this part of herself, believing the world no longer wanted her music. And now she realized it had been waiting for her all along. Back at the restaurant, news of her audition spread. The staff congratulated her warmly. Maya hugged her, saying, "You've finally let the world see what we all knew." Even Mr. Harris, who had once laughed at her quiet demeanor, now looked at her with admiration. I "I never thought I'd see someone transform a room like that," he admitted. "You've changed everything here." The piano in the corner, once a silent observer, had become a symbol of her journey. It had held her secrets, her fears, and finally her triumph. Each key carried a memory, each melody a story. And now it wasn't just an object, it was part of her life again, part of the story she could no longer hide. As weeks turned into months, Lena performed more often. She played at small gatherings, local events, and even charity functions. Every performance brought joy to others and healed a little more of her own heart. Yet she never forgot where she had started. The quiet mornings at the restaurant, the secret moments alone with the piano, the years of waiting and longing. Those experiences had shaped her, grounded her, and made her music richer and more human. One evening, as she left the restaurant after a long day, she paused by the piano once more. Her fingers brushed the keys gently, and she smiled. Life had come full circle. From fear and loss, from hiding and silence, she had emerged stronger, braver, and ready to embrace the gift she had once abandoned. The city lights reflected softly in her eyes. She could feel the music inside her, vibrant and alive, and she knew that this was only the beginning. The restaurant, once a place of ordinary work, had become a bridge to her true life. The people she had served, the manager who had doubted her, the quiet nights alone with the piano, they had all been part of the journey that led her back to herself. And now, Lena could finally live fully, not just as a server or a shadow of her past, but as the musician she was always meant to be. Her story, once hidden in silence, was now a song in the hearts of those who heard her. And for Lena, that was enough, because she had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes life makes you wait. Sometimes it hides what you love, but when the moment is right, it will lead you back to who you truly are. And Lena finally had found her way home.